As it was said previously, why eIDAS has been introduced is for create trust environment and a legal certainty framework for introducing building blocks to secure the actually transaction, in particular transactions by means of the identification. With the aim of reducing the legal fragmentation between 28 at that time and 27 states that have or might have that very specific verification and other verification always harmonized in terms of the legal effects or the requirements and so on. Also to introduce more interoperability and more convenience for the user to have a real foundation for secure and seamless reporting. So was it successful? To some extent, yes, but also in 10 years of the implementation of the electronic eIDAS regulation in 2014 and for the trust services in 2016, there was a revision window that was already imposed by the regulation. So it is part of the duties of the in this revision, it was actually clear that with regard to the ID means, they were not always available for all new citizens, and certainly not at the highest level of assurance, which is the it is still based on heterogeneous means. So you may have 27 different complete implementations. So interoperability was assured by means of a framework, which is an infrastructure that is very heavy to maintain, and nodes that needs to be implemented. So it's not really an efficient way of organizing. There are not a lot of cross-border use because of these kind of capabilities. With regard to qualified trust services, there is surely a legal certainty, but as it was mentioned previously, there is no real implementation certainty because of a lack of implementing acts. So some other legislation that would point to some specific standards that would give presumption of compliance when you implement these type of technologies, that you are sure or you have pretty good assurance that you will meet the requirements of the legal aspect. So, and it revealed to be a very important barrier for implementers, for business, because when you have a business actors, then you have to invest money. But if you invest in the wrong technology with the wrong implementation, then you're not sure that you meet the legal requirements, and you are hesitant. And that was also a big lesson learned from the implementation of this regulation. So this kind of lack of harmonization and guidance was also hard on the supervision aspects. So they have 27 member states, 27 supervisory bodies, which are meant to supervise the qualified trust service providers and trust service providers, but there is no harmonized guideline to conduct the work. And there were also some missing type of services in the areas of archiving, management cities that it's currently their duty or duty to be, but not really as such the qualified trust service and the electronic administration. What is the solution that what are the solutions Member State, there will be many different types of EUDIW wallets, but at least they will all meet a common set of standard specification. So there will be no longer need for eIDAS to go further specific infrastructure, because by design use the same specification, the same standard. They will also shift to the user-centric and user control. They will be designed for cross-border use, so facilitating the recognition of services, authentication online, identification online, but also a tool for creating qualified electronic signatures and storing, preserving attestation of attributes, and also be a bridge to the qualified trust services as a tool to onboard at a very high level of assurance for verifying the identity, the authentication, the identity, and verifying attributes, so that you can also more easily accessing qualified trust services. And for the qualified trust services, there will be an improved framework with regard to more implementation certainty aspects, because the implementing acts that have never been adopted in the eIDAS1, they will have to be adopted, because a huge number of implementing acts will have to be adopted for 2040. Giving more guidance and assurance in terms of, if I implement this kind of thing, then I have specification. And there is in the introduction of a new type of qualified trust services, the archiving, ledger management of remote QSC, and qualified electronic attestation of attributes. So it is actually a long journey for Europe to adopt, revise the regulation. So it started actually in 2020 with a study, an assessment of the eIDAS regulation and its implementation. So it was there was an open public consultation, an impact assessment, a study on the result and the report on the implementation, and of course some drafting for a new proposal. This new proposal came out from the Commission in June 2021, and then start actually the legislative process for the two co-legislators, the Member States, or the Council of the Member State, and the European Parliament, to analyze the proposal, to make some some changes. So each of the co-legislators, the Council first came up with, after 6 drafting and 4 presidencies, so in 2022, with a general approach to a proposal of an amendment of the regulation. The Parliament did the same. They used 4 committees, and they published a report in February this year on the same type of counter-proposal. Once they've done this, then goes the negotiation between the two co-legislators, with the Commission acting as a good man in facilitating the negotiations, the understanding of the original proposal, what it was meant. And it took actually 4 trilogues, so 4 political debates, more than 40 technical meetings in order to come to a final provisional agreement on a text that has been adopted, not really adopted, but approved the 8th of November, so very few days ago. And no start, so there is a final text which is rough, so there is plenty of editorial errors, clerical errors, or legal linguistics potential errors. So there is an improvement on the text that has been started now. There will be 2 votes for the 2 co-legislators, one at technical level or committee level, and one at the plenary level, so the formal adoption of the text. So the committee level adoption will be by end of this month, actually, so surely by end of this year. And the plenary vote will be for early next year in January or February. And depending on the work on the translation, because any legislation has to be translated in 20 languages. And the final adoption will come for spring next year, March or April or some more. So it's quite a long journey for improving the legal text in Europe. So it's almost 4 years to come to an amendment of the regulation. So a little bit back on the principle of the regulation, the current one. So there are 3 chapters, one on eID means, one on trust services, and one which is not really known, but it is on electronic document, which actually is an important one, because maybe the most important one, because then it recognizes that an electronic document is something that has a non-discrimination effect and should not be denied any legal effects. So it's a starting point, and then you can provide eID means with trust services, something like that. What will eIDAS2 change? Not a lot of things on these aspects, except introducing 4 new qualified trust services or 4 new type of trust services. But it will add basically the wallet, which will be an eID means of level assurance I that will have to be provided by the member states. The user will have the choice to use it or not, or to receive it or not, but it will be a certified, so it's no longer a peer review mechanism, but it is a certification-based mechanism for the assurance that the wallet that has been provided by the member state will meet the requirement of the regulation. It is based, as I said, on common standards and specifications, so introducing by design, not only cybersecurity by design, privacy by design, but also interoperability by design, because they will all satisfy the same set of regulations, requirements. It will be open source, at least for the application part, and it will allow the user to create qualified electronic signatures, or when the user is a legal person, qualified electronic seal. And the relying parties will have to be registered. So it's a lightweight registration process. So it's not a pre-authorization process, but any relying party will have to be registered to indicate which kind of service it intends to provide to the users, and which kind of data they will ask for providing the services. It is also better included and referenced also by the fast-changing legal environment. So since the eIDAS1, there are quite a lot of new regulations or directives that has been introduced. So it is also aligned with the GDPR, so the General Data Protection Regulation, but also the NIS2 directive, because whatever it is related to the risk management and the security or information security management requirements, then it is transferred and relying to NIS2. But also Cybersecurity Act, Cyber Resilience Acts, DMA, DSA, and all the sectorial legislation will also cross-reference the eIDAS regulation. So in a nutshell, the wallet, it will be free for use for all citizens. So it has to be provided by member state, but the users are free to onboard on it or download it and use it on a voluntary basis. It has to be accepted throughout the union, so it will be recognized by all, of course, member states and public services providers, but also by private service providers when they require strong customer authentication. So they will call relying parties, and all these relying parties will need to be registered. But for all transactions that require authorization, it will be accepted by service providers. But eID means that by design will be secure and privacy oriented, so the user will be at the center, so it's a user-centric environment that controls and protects its identity. It's an eID mean plus, because it's an eID means, so providing level of assurance I identification and authentication, but also enabling the user to create qualified electronic signature, to store and present, to request, store, present electronic attestation of attributes, potentially combined with different type of attributes in a selective disclosure presentation. And there are plenty of use cases, including the mobile driving license, the MDL, diplomas, or whatever type of electronic attestation you may dream of. It is possible to store, to present them in the wallet. There will be also a privacy dashboard, so a logging audit log facility that is only available to the user, so the user himself manage all the history of transactions, so to whom he has provided which kind of information, but also enabling him to have some kind of extracts and support or substantiate complaints when there is a bad behavior from a relying party, or to request assistance from the DPA. There will be, as I said, many different wallets, but one common set of specifications and standards. It is designed for cross-border and a bridge for using qualified trust services. Also, the Commission will provide a reference implementation in open source, so that it will facilitate member states to implement the wallet, and it will be open source as well. There are also 4 large-scale pilots. Usually I don't use, or I don't like this kind of large-scale pilots, because in the past it has been proved to have spending money for nothing. But these are not really large-scale pilots, but large-scale production pilots. So that's real pilots with real use cases that will have to be sustainable afterwards. So it's a quite good one. So there are 4 funded by the Commission, at least for half of the amount, and they will address a very huge large of use cases and potential implementation and applications, access to electronic government services, mobile driving license, presentation of attestation in the context of education, health, travels, social security, so you can obtain electronic attestation and prove your not only your identity, but also the attributes and qualification you may have in organization, to register a SIM, to open a bank account, to initiate payments. So it will not be a purse, but it will allow to sign or to initiate payments, and to sign, of course, a contract and qualified by means of qualified electronic signatures. So in terms of the basic principles of the regulation, where it is actually a legal text that is directly applicable in all member states, with different type of possible implementing acts. With regard to the key principle of trust services, there is a legal effect that is granted to all types of trust services, non-qualified one as a non-discriminatory, so they cannot be denied a legal effect just because they are qualified, or just because they are not qualified, or just because they are electronic. And of course, qualified electronic trust services, they will be granted a more formal legal effect. There is a principle of transparency and liability, on risk management approach, and on technological neutrality. And in the current eIDAS regulation, on the voluntary usage of standards. So even QTSP, they are not obliged to use standards, provided they can demonstrate they meet the requirements of the regulation. Would there have been some implementing act adopted, then they would have the possibility to rely on the standards to facilitate the demonstration that they meet the requirement because of the presumption of compliance. So in eIDAS2, most of the things will be unchanged, except that within 12 months after the adoption of the regulation, most of the implementing acts will have to be adopted. So there will be, in most of the time, some references to technical implementation. For the risk management approach, there is a shift. So you will notice that the Article 19 have been removed. So all the risk management approach, the implementation of information security practices and things like that has been removed from the regulation, but there is a pointer to NIS2 directive that applies to non-qualified TSPs and qualified TSPs. And there will be also a shift with regard to the voluntary implementation of technical standards or the presumption of compliance. Sometime for some aspects of the regulation, there will be mandatory technical specifications. So you may be familiar with the pyramid of trust for the trust services, where you have the trust mark that will not change. You have a constitutive list of what is qualified and for which kind of qualified trust service that will remain, the trusted list. So it will be extended to the new qualified trust services, of course. The supervision regime, which is a pre-authorization regime for QA/TSP, a complete life cycle related, so it is at the very start, at the initiation, but also during the life cycle, with two-yearly regular audit, and also a determination of the QTS of the qualified trust services. But for the moment, it is based on a de facto accreditation system, which is based on, as it was mentioned in the previous presentation, on the European Cooperation for Accreditation that has promoted an eIDAS accreditation scheme based on ISO 17065 and supplemented by an ETSI standard that will, because ISO 17065 is for any kind of product, any kind of service, any kind of processes. And this ETSI standard 31943 is actually profiling it for the provisioning of trust services. But the normative document against which the QTSP providing a qualified trust service is actually certified in this case is the requirement of the regulation. So it's not against standard that you are accredited or that you are certified to QTSP, but against the regulation. And of course, the standards are facilitating the assessment as a benchmark, but it's not a mandatory benchmark, a mandatory tool for using the benchmark, provided that you may demonstrate that you meet the requirements. So what will change in the in eIDAS2? So the new 4 types of qualified trust services that will have to be reflected in the trusted list, and much more guidance in terms of new implementing acts that will provide either a presumption of compliance or mandatory specification to the QTSP. And also there is a small shift in terms of the empowerment of the Commission to adopt and establish implementing act. It's no longer pointing to a standard, to an existing standard, whether or not it is good or bad. So there is still a preference to use existing standards, whether they are European or international, but if they are not fit for purpose, or if it is necessary, then the Commission is empowered to establish its own technical specifications, or to patch or to complement the standards, and to provide also procedures that if need be. So in terms of what are the new 4 types of qualified trust services and what are the new legal effects of the qualified? So the qualified electronic archiving service, it will provide a presumption of the integrity and the origin of the recorded data during the whole preservation period when it is provided by the QTSP. So you have a presumption of integrity and origin of the recorded data, of the archived data. For the remote management of QSCD, you have no real legal effect, but it is patching the lack of certainty what needs the QTSP to do in terms of managing remote QSCDs. So may still be a lack. There is no qualified trust service for the remote creation of qualified electronic service. So you need, as a trust service provider, for creating remote or assisting a user to sign remotely by creating qualified electronic signature, you still need a qualified TSP to issue qualified certificates. You need somebody on your behalf as a signatory to manage your remote keys. That is the piece that was missing. And you still need to create the qualified electronic signatures in terms of implementing. But it's on missing piece that is fulfilled. The qualified electronic ledgers, they will provide a presumption of the unique and accurate sequential chronological ordering and of the integrity of the data record. So it's integrity and the chronological sequential of the record. And the qualified electronic attestation of attributes, they will actually basically have the same legal effect as the paper-based counterpart. So it's just like, or very similar to the qualified electronic signature that has the same legal effect as handwritten signature. These qualified electronic attestation of attributes, they will have the same legal effect as the paper-based form. But also, there is maybe a huge difference for the non-qualified trust service provisioning of archiving and e-ledgers, or any type of electronic attestation of attribute, or any kind of attestation of attribute that is provided in electronic form, that if this is provided as a service normally provided for remuneration, then the provider automatically becomes a TSP, which is subject to ex-post supervision, so there is no pre-authorization to enter the market, but they will fall under the supervision of the supervisory bodies, and maybe most importantly, they will be subject to the NIS2 directive in their member state. So that means that they will have to implement a risk-based management assurance with, depending on the type of service they will provide, the assurance that they have implemented mitigation measures with regard to the risk they have in providing the service. So with regard to the supervision system, it will basically remain the same, but with much more implementing acts, much more guidance in terms of how it should be implemented. Starting from the supervision, so the accreditation of the conformity assessment bodies, the way they will conduct the audit against which kind of criteria. So this will be harmonized. Also, the existing implementing act with regard to the signature and seal format with regard to the public services that needs to use or to verify qualified or non-qualified signatures or advanced electronic signatures, so that they will be updated. Certification of the QSCD, especially for the removed QSCD, where the current implementing act does not point to any standards, but then it allows a member state to introduce alternative procedures that should be equivalent, but it is not harmonized, but then it will change. And also for the qualified certificate, there will be such an implementing act, just like for any kind of qualified trust service, there will be some implementing act, either pointing to standards in the context of the presumption of compliance or as a mandatory implementation. Last part of the international aspects, so what will change in terms of mutual recognition or recognition of foreign trust service providers providing trust services that are meant to be equivalent to qualified trust service providers in Europe. Currently, the only way to implement a real agreement between a third country and the Union is by means of an international trade agreement, which can take years or which is really, really difficult to implement. In eIDAS2, it will still be a possibility, but there is also a possibility for the Commission by using an implementing decision, so with a methodology supported by the member state and adopted by the member state, on a case-by-case basis. So for each and every trusted third country or international organization, there will be the possibility to have an implementing decision to assess whether or not a set or a subset of qualified trust service providers or trust service providers in this country meets the requirements of the regulation and then can be recognized as equivalent. So there is a requirement or a condition is that the third country has to implement a trusted list, not that the third country has to implement a trusted list for its own national purpose, but at least for those qualified trust service or those trust services that will have to be recognized by the union, for them, they need to implement a trusted list as a mean to indicate in a machine processable way which kind of trust service and for which kind of service can be recognized equivalent to the trust services or the qualified trust service in Europe. So it's not a requirement for the country to implement the trusted list as a representation of its own legislation, but at least for those that needs to be recognized with the union. But still, those trust service providers and trust services, they still need to meet the requirements as a prerequisite of the eIDAS as well, of course. There is also an alternative, because with regard to the advanced level of signatures or seal, actually there is no territoriality requirement in the current regulation for these signatures or seal to be recognized as advanced electronic signatures or seal in Europe. So wherever they come from, those public online services that are provided by member states that are requiring advanced electronic signatures or qualified, they must recognize, especially if they are implemented in one of the standards that are referenced in the implementing act, so PADES, CADES, XADES, and the ASIC form. Those public online services, they have to recognize these advanced electronic signatures, even if they are coming from Japan, from Peru, from South Africa, or wherever. But of course, it's not easy for a public administration to recognize a foreign signature meets indeed the advanced electronic signature requirements or seal requirements in the regulation. So the Commission has provided, in order to facilitate this recognition, an advanced lottery that points to third country trusted list that provides a list of providers that are providing trust services that ensure that the signatures or the seal that has been implemented based on these certificates meets the requirement at least of the advanced electronic signatures. So this is the so-called advanced eIDAS lottery that for the moment there is only one country, but there are many other countries knocking at the door of the Commission in order to be listed in this trusted list, because then the benchmark is that currently it has to be at a qualified level in the third country, whatever it means, but that's something that is equivalent to handwritten signature, or that support equivalent to handwritten signature in the third country. They will be automatically proposed for recognition by the member state, because still it's not a mandatory tool or an enforcement tool. It's just a facilitating tool for the member state to bilaterally recognize the signatures from these countries or these countries. So it's quite interesting tool, because there is not so many barriers, just like having qualified trust service providers, a complete assessment on the legal context, on the supervision system, or the technical part and the trust representation. Still, there is an assessment so that the union can be sure, or the Commission can be sure, that at the national level, they are recognized as equivalent to handwritten signature, or to provide the same type of integrity and proof of origin requirement for the seals. But still, then it also facilitates very quickly the mutual recognition of signatures between the EU and third countries. And this will continue in the eIDAS2 as well. So this is very briefly or very long, the overview of the main changes for eIDAS2 and the main expectations on this type of.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Olivier-san, and thank you for coming all over from Belgium to Japan